The fluorescent lights hummed above Darius Washington as he pushed his mop across the marble floors of the Blackwell Enterprises executive suite. It was 11 at night, and the building was empty, or so he thought. His hands, calloused and worn from years of manual labor, gripped the mop handle with the same determination that had carried him through the darkest year of his life. 6-year-old Zuri was asleep at his sister's apartment across town in the Maplewood Heights neighborhood, probably clutching the worn photograph of her mother that she kept under her pillow every single night without fail. Darius blinked back tears as he worked, pushing the mop in long sweeping arcs across the gleaming stone. The rhythmic swish of the mop was the only sound breaking the silence of the vast corridor, a sound that had become something like a meditation for him in these lonely hours when the rest of the city was winding down and the building became his own quiet kingdom of emptiness. He had taken this night shift because it paid an extra $2 an hour, $2 closer to the operation Zuri needed, $2 closer to keeping the promise he had made at his wife's grave on that terrible rainy afternoon when the world had felt like it was ending and the only thing keeping him upright was the small hand of his daughter gripping his fingers. He remembered standing there in Rosewood Memorial Cemetery, the rain soaking through his only suit, the one he had worn to their wedding 6 years before, and whispering to the freshly turned earth that he would take care of their baby girl no matter what it cost him, no matter how many floors he had to mop or how many hours of sleep he had to sacrifice. But tonight, everything was about to change in ways he could never have imagined, in ways that would reshape his understanding of his wife, of fate, of the invisible threads that connect strangers across the vast divide of circumstance and class. As Darius moved toward the corner office, the one belonging to Raymond Blackwell himself, the billionaire CEO whose face graced magazine covers and business journals, and whose name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and awe in financial circles around the world, he noticed a light still on. The warm golden glow spilled from beneath the heavy oak door, casting a thin line of light across the darkened hallway. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle, uncertainty creeping through him like cold water. In his 3 months working here at the Blackwell Enterprises Tower in downtown Crescent City, he had never encountered anyone this late. The cleaning crew had strict instructions from management. In clean, out invisible. That was the protocol. That was what people like him were supposed to be in buildings like this, places where decisions were made that moved markets and shaped industries. He was a ghost, a shadow, someone who existed only in the evidence of clean floors and emptied trash cans, never in the flesh. He knocked softly, his knuckles barely making contact with the polished wood. No answer. Protocol said to come back later, to move on to the next office and circle back. But his supervisor, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson who ran the cleaning crew with military precision, had been absolutely clear during the briefing that evening. Mr. Blackwell's office needed to be done tonight. There was an important meeting tomorrow morning with international investors, and the office needed to be spotless, the surfaces gleaming, the air fresh with the subtle scent of the lemon polish that Mr. Blackwell preferred. Darius eased the door open and stepped inside, his worn sneakers silent on the plush carpet that felt like walking on clouds after hours of standing on cold marble. The office was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the apartment where Darius and Zuri lived in the Thornton Park neighborhood. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, rich and warm, the kind of wood that whispered of old money and refined taste. Leather furniture was arranged in tasteful groupings, deep burgundy chairs, and a sofa that looked like it cost more than Darius made in a year. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the far wall, overlooking the glittering city below, the lights of Crescent City twinkling like earthbound stars, the river a dark ribbon winding through the urban landscape. And there, behind a desk the size of Darius's entire kitchen, sat Raymond Blackwell himself. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that suggested he had not always lived behind a desk. His dark skin was illuminated by the warm desk lamp, reading glasses perched on his nose, a pen in his hand as he pored over documents spread across the massive desk. He was a distinguished man in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of presence that filled a room even when he was sitting quietly. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from nothing, who had grown up in the same kinds of neighborhoods where Darius now lived, who had never forgotten where he came from even as he ascended to heights that most people could only dream of. "I am so sorry, sir," Darius stammered, backing toward the door, his heart hammering in his chest. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I can come back later." "It's no problem at all. I'll just go ahead and finish the other offices and circle back when you're done working." No, please." Sterling looked up from his work, waving him in with a casual gesture that suggested he was entirely comfortable with the interruption. "I should have locked the door. I lose track of time when I'm working, especially on nights like this when the building is quiet and I can actually think without someone scheduling my thoughts for me. Please, go ahead with whatever you need to do. I'll stay out of your way. I'm just finishing up some projections for tomorrow's meeting." Darius nodded, keeping his head down as he began dusting the bookshelves that lined the east wall of the office. The shelves were filled with leather-bound volumes, business texts, biographies of leaders and innovators, and interspersed among them were personal items, photographs in silver frames, small sculptures, awards and recognitions from various organizations. He worked carefully, methodically, the way he always did, treating even this task with the same attention and respect he brought to everything in his life. He had learned long ago that rich people preferred you invisible, that they were most comfortable when you moved through their spaces like a gentle breeze, present but unnoticed, necessary but unremarkable. And he needed this job too desperately to risk making waves. Every dollar counted. Every shift mattered. Zuri's life depended on it. But as he worked his way around the room, moving from the bookshelves to the credenza behind Raymond Blackwell's desk, something made his blood run cold. His hand froze mid-wipe, every muscle in his body locking into place, as if he had been turned to stone. The duster slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet office like a gunshot. There, in an ornate silver frame, positioned with obvious care and reverence on the polished surface of the credenza, was a photograph of his wife. Not a woman who looked like his wife. Not someone similar who shared certain features or a passing resemblance. His wife, Nadine, wearing the same yellow sundress from their trip to Amber Beach 3 summers ago, the one she had bought at the little boutique on Cedar Street, because she said the color made her feel like sunshine. Her dark hair was caught mid-laugh by the ocean wind, natural curls dancing around her face like a halo. Her eyes were crinkled with joy, her smile so wide and genuine that even in a photograph it could light up a room. The photograph he had taken himself, standing ankle-deep in the warm sand while Zuri built sandcastles behind them and the seagulls wheeled overhead. The room spun around him like a carnival ride. Darius gripped the edge of the credenza with both hands, his knees threatening to buckle beneath him. His vision blurred and sharpened in waves, and for a moment he thought he might pass out right there on the expensive carpet in the billionaire's office. "That's..." His voice came out strangled, barely human, the sound of a man who has been punched in the gut and is trying to form words through the pain. "That's..." Raymond Blackwell looked up sharply from his work, concern immediately crossing his distinguished features. He set down his pen and rose slightly from his chair. "Are you all right? You've gone pale. Do you need to sit down? Should I call someone? Can I get you some water? Why is my wife's photo in your office?" Darius turned from the credenza, his voice rising, grief and confusion and a year's worth of bottled rage suddenly exploding from somewhere deep inside him like a geyser that had been building pressure for too long. His eyes were wide, his breathing ragged, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Why do you have a picture of Nadine? Who are you to her? What possible connection could you have to my wife? How did you even get this photograph?" "What? Your wife?" Raymond Blackwell stood slowly, his face draining of color beneath his dark complexion, his expression shifting from concern to shock to something that looked almost like recognition. He looked at Darius, really looked at him for the first time, not as a janitor, not as a member of the cleaning staff, But as a person, a man standing in his office with tears streaming down his face and a grief so raw it filled the room like smoke. Your wife's name was Nadine? Was, Darius repeated, and the word tasted like ashes in his mouth, like the residue of a fire that had consumed everything beautiful in his world and left nothing but gray ruin behind. Nadine died 14 months ago. 14 months and 6 days, to be exact, because he counted every single one, felt every single one like a stone added to the weight he carried on his shoulders. And I need to know why a man she never mentioned, a billionaire she couldn't possibly have known, has her photograph in his office like she was someone important to you. Like she meant something to you. Because she meant everything to me, and I thought I knew everything about her life. And now I'm standing here looking at her face in a frame that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and I don't understand. The silence that followed was suffocating. It pressed against the walls of the office and filled every corner, heavy and thick and charged with something electric. Raymond Blackwell sank back into his chair, his hands trembling visibly as he removed his glasses and set them carefully on the desk. He pressed his fingers to his temples and closed his eyes for a long moment. And when he finally opened them, they were glistening with moisture. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion, stripped of the confident authority that characterized his public persona. The voice of a man who had been carrying his own burden of gratitude and grief and had just been confronted with the human cost of it all. Sit down, please. You deserve to know everything. You deserve to know the whole story from the beginning, and I promise you I will tell you all of it without leaving anything out. Darius didn't want to sit. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to grab that photograph and run, to protect Nadine's memory from whatever revelation was coming, from whatever secret had been living in this office high above the city where his wife had lived and died and loved with everything she had. But something in Raymond Blackwell's face, genuine anguish, raw and unguarded, the look of a man who understood loss and gratitude in equal measure, made him lower himself into the leather chair opposite the desk. The chair was impossibly comfortable, and the absurd contrast between its luxury and the chaos of his emotions almost made him laugh. 5 years ago, Raymond Blackwell began, his gaze drifting to the photograph on the credenza, his voice taking on the quality of a man recounting a story he had told himself 1,000 times in the quiet hours of the night. My daughter was dying. 16 years old. Her name is Lyric. She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 15, and for a while the treatments seemed to be working. We had every advantage. The best doctors at Meridian Medical Center, the most advanced treatments, access to clinical trials that most families would never even know about. I could afford anything, any specialist, any experimental therapy, any last-ditch effort. But money, for all its power, cannot manufacture a biological match. And we had run out of options. The only hope, the very last thread we were clinging to, was a bone marrow transplant. He paused, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose, collecting himself before continuing. But finding a match. He shook his head slowly, the weight of that memory evident in every line of his face. We searched everywhere. I used every resource at my disposal, every contact in every country, every medical database, every registry around the world. I offered any amount of money to expedite searches, to expand the donor pool, to find anyone whose marrow would be compatible with my daughter's. Nothing. Month after month, nothing. I watched Lyric getting weaker, watched the light in her eyes dimming, watched my little girl, this brilliant, vibrant, beautiful soul who wanted to change the world, slipping away from me. And there was nothing all my billions could do about it. His voice cracked on the word billions, and Darius saw in that crack the truth that wealth was no shield against the deepest human pain. Then, by some miracle, Raymond Blackwell continued, and I do not use that word lightly because I'm not a man given to supernatural thinking, but there is no other word for what happened. There was a match. A perfect match. Not just adequate, not just workable, but perfect, the kind of match that doctors said they rarely see, the kind that give the patient the best possible chance at a full recovery and a long life. He looked directly at Darius, and in his eyes was a gratitude so profound it bordered on reverence. A young woman who didn't know us, who had nothing to gain, who had no connection to our family or our world. A woman who had signed up for the bone marrow donor registry on a whim during a blood drive at the Thornton Park Community Center, where she worked as a program coordinator. She had been walking past the registration table, and something made her stop. Something made her fill out the forms and give a sample and add her name to a list of strangers willing to endure pain and discomfort to save someone they had never met. Darius's breath caught in his chest like a bird trapped behind his ribs. Nadine had done that. He remembered it clearly, remembered it with the vivid specificity of a memory that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now burned with significance. She had come home that Tuesday evening, still in her work clothes, her eyes bright with the particular excitement she always got when she felt she had done something meaningful. She had told him about the blood drive, about how the volunteers had explained the bone marrow registry, about how easy it had been to sign up, how everyone should do it, how it cost nothing, but could mean everything to someone you would never meet. He had smiled and kissed her forehead and told her she was the best person he knew, and she had laughed and said she was just doing what anyone would do. And he had thought, no, not anyone, just you, just Nadine. The donation procedure is not simple, Raymond Blackwell continued, his voice steady now, but heavy with the weight of what he was describing. It is not like giving blood. It is painful, invasive. It takes time, preparation, multiple appointments, injections to stimulate marrow production, and then the extraction itself, which involves anesthesia and needles in the hip bones and a recovery period that can last weeks. The discomfort is significant. The disruption to daily life is real. Many people who initially agree back out when they learn what is actually involved, and no one blames them because it is asking a great deal of someone for the sake of a complete stranger. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. But this woman, your wife, she never hesitated. Not once. Not for a single moment. When the registry contacted her and told her she was a match, she said yes immediately. When they explained the procedure, the pain, the recovery time, the potential complications, she said yes again. She took time off work without complaint. She dealt with the discomfort of the preparatory injections, the fatigue, the aching in her bones. She went through the extraction procedure and endured the recovery. And she did it all with a grace and a warmth that the medical team still talks about to this day. His voice cracked again, more severely this time, and he had to pause and take several deep breaths before he could continue. And she saved my daughter's life. She saved Lyric's life. The transplant was successful beyond what any of the doctors dared to hope. Lyric's body accepted the marrow beautifully. Her counts came back. Her strength returned. She went from a hospital bed to a classroom in 6 months, from a girl who couldn't climb stairs to a girl who was dancing at her prom. Because of your wife. Because of Nadine. Raymond Blackwell's composure finally broke, and tears rolled freely down his cheeks, glinting in the lamplight. And she refused to accept anything in return. Absolutely nothing. Not money, not gifts, not a donation to a charity of her choice. Nothing. When the registry facilitated an anonymous message from our family expressing our gratitude and asking if there was anything at all we could do for her, she sent back a message that said, and I have it memorized because I read it every morning. She said seeing a 16-year-old get a second chance at life is payment enough. Tell her to live beautifully, and that will be all the thanks I will ever need. Tears streamed down Darius's face, hot and relentless, soaking into the collar of his work uniform. This was so Nadine, his Nadine, the woman who volunteered at the Harmony Street Soup Kitchen every Saturday morning, who gave her lunch to homeless people she passed on the street and then told him she wasn't hungry when he asked about it later, who once spent her last $20 on winter gloves for a stranger at the bus stop because his hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold. The woman who saw the good in everyone and believed, truly believed with every fiber of her being, that the purpose of life was to ease the suffering of others whenever and however you could. She never told me, Darius whispered, more to himself than to Raymond Blackwell. She never said a single word about any of this. Not the registry, not the match, not the donation, nothing. How could she go through something like that? something so significant, and never mention it. But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. Of course, she hadn't told him. That wasn't who Nadine was. She didn't do good deeds for recognition or praise or the warm feeling of being admired. She did them because they needed doing, because someone was suffering and she could help, and that was enough. Telling people about it would have felt like taking credit, and taking credit would have diminished the purity of the act in her eyes. She would have carried this secret like she carried all her kindnesses, quietly, without fanfare, like a candle burning in a room where no one was watching. "We weren't allowed to meet," Raymond Blackwell said, regaining some measure of composure, though his eyes remained wet. "That is the policy of the registry, the rules of the National Marrow Donor Program. Anonymity is maintained for at least 1 year after donation, to protect both parties, to allow the medical relationship to exist without the complications of personal connection. Both sides can choose to reveal their identities after that period, but only if both consent." He gestured toward the photograph. "But I kept this photo, the one the registry sent along with some basic information about the donor, because I needed to remember. I needed to see her face every day and remember that people like her existed in the world. That in a society obsessed with wealth and status and the accumulation of things, where everyone seemed to be calculating angles and measuring advantage, someone could be so purely, completely, selflessly good. She restored something in me that years of business and deal-making had worn away. She reminded me that the best of humanity was not a myth or a fantasy, but a living, breathing reality." He wiped at his own eyes with the back of his hand, then reached for a tissue from the box on his desk. "I was planning to reach out when a mandatory year was up, to thank her properly, to meet her face to face, and tell her what she meant to our family. I had plans, elaborate plans. Lyric and I talked about it constantly, about how we would express our gratitude, about what we could possibly say to a woman who had given us everything." His voice broke completely, and when he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "But when I finally reached out through the registry, I learned that she had passed away. I learned that Nadine Washington had died 3 months before the anonymity period ended, and that I would never get to look her in the eye and say thank you. That Lyric would never get to embrace the woman who gave her a second life. I'm so deeply, deeply sorry for your loss. I have grieved for your wife as if she were my own family, because in every way that matters, she is." Darius couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The office, with its expensive furnishings and its panoramic views, had become a sacred space, a confessional where the secrets of the dead were finally being spoken aloud. All this time, he had thought he knew every beautiful thing about Nadine. He had cataloged her kindnesses like a curator tending a precious collection, each memory a treasure he guarded against the erosion of time. But she had carried this one hidden, tucked away in the quiet chambers of her enormous heart. And now it was emerging into the light like a flower that had been growing in darkness. "Your daughter," he finally managed, his voice raw and rough, scraped clean of everything but the essential question. "Is she?" "She is alive," Raymond Blackwell said, and a smile broke through his tears like sunrise through storm clouds. "She is thriving. She is magnificent. She just started her first year at Prestige University across the river, studying to be a doctor. A doctor because she wants to do for others what was done for her. Every day she lives, every breath she takes, every dream she chases is because of your wife's gift. Lyric carries Nadine's marrow in her bones and Nadine's spirit in her heart, and she knows it, and she honors it with everything she does." They sat in silence for a long moment. Two men from different worlds, different tax brackets, different sides of the vast chasm that wealth and poverty carve through society, bound together by one woman's extraordinary kindness. The city glittered below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lives being lived in those lights, millions of stories unfolding, and Darius thought about how many of those stories might contain the same kind of hidden heroism, the same quiet sacrifices made by people who would never be recognized for them. Finally, Raymond Blackwell stood and walked to a section of the wall where an original painting hung, a beautiful landscape in oils that depicted a countryside scene. He pressed something behind the frame, and the painting swung open on hidden hinges to reveal a safe built into the wall. He entered a combination with practiced fingers, opened the safe, and retrieved a thick folder bound with a rubber band. He carried it back to the desk and sat down again, placing the folder in front of Darius with the care of someone handling something precious. After I learned about Nadine's death, I looked into your situation, he said quietly, meeting Darius's eyes with an expression that was both apologetic and resolute. I hope that doesn't seem invasive or presumptuous, but I needed to know. I needed to know if there was anyone she left behind, anyone who might need help, any way I could honor what she had done for my family. I used my resources discreetly, respectfully, and I learned about your circumstances. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I learned about Zuri. I learned about her condition, the congenital heart defect that requires surgical intervention. I learned about the operation she needs, the one that has been delayed again and again because of insurance limitations and financial constraints. I learned about the struggle you have been fighting every single day, working multiple jobs, selling everything you could sell, trying to put together enough money to save your daughter's life the way your wife once saved mine. Darius's hand shook as he opened the folder. Inside were medical documents from Meridian Medical Center and the renowned Children's Cardiac Center at Hargrove Pediatric Hospital, financial statements showing accounts established in Zuri's name, letters from specialists and surgeons whose names Darius recognized from desperate late-night internet searches, doctors he had never dared to dream might actually treat his daughter. "It is all arranged," Raymond Blackwell said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a man who was accustomed to making things happen and who had channeled that power into something deeply personal. The surgery at Hargrove Pediatric Hospital with Dr. Vanessa Coleman, who is the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country and who has already reviewed Zuri's case and is confident about the outcome. The best cardiology team that exists, handpicked specifically for Zuri's condition. All aftercare, all follow-up appointments, all rehabilitation, everything she will need for a complete recovery, covered in full. He turned to the next section of the folder. And there's more. A trust fund has been established for Zuri's education, fully funded, that will cover everything from elementary school through graduate school, if she chooses to go that far. Full medical coverage for both of you through the company's premium plan. And a position for you here at Blackwell Enterprises, not in janitorial services, but in our community operations division. It is a real position with real responsibilities. You would be helping to coordinate our outreach programs in communities like Thornton Park, the neighborhoods where people are struggling the way you have been struggling. Full benefits, a salary that will let you actually be present in your daughter's life instead of working nights and missing her childhood. A salary that reflects the value of the work, not the minimum someone can be paid to do it. He held up a hand as Darius opened his mouth to speak, anticipating the objection before it was formed. "This is not charity. I need you to hear that and believe it, because I mean it with everything I am. This is not pity. This is not a wealthy man assuaging his guilt or trying to buy his way out of an emotional debt. This is what I should have been able to give Nadine. This is the gratitude that should have reached her while she was alive, the thanks that should have been expressed in tangible form while she could still benefit from it. Since I cannot give it to her, since the universe and its cruelty took her before I could, I am giving it to the family she loved, to the daughter who carries her kindness forward, to the husband who shared a life with the most remarkable person I have never met." Darius broke down completely. The dam he had built inside himself, the wall he had constructed brick by brick over 14 months of grief and struggle and sleepless nights and impossible choices, crumbled all at once. Sobs racked his body, deep, guttural sounds that came from a place beyond conscious control. He wept for Nadine, for Zuri, for himself, for the beautiful cruelty of discovering that his wife's goodness had been even vaster than he knew, that her light had reached further than he had ever imagined. Raymond Blackwell moved around the desk and stood beside him, placing a firm, steady hand on his shoulder. The billionaire was crying too, tears falling freely. And in that moment, the distance between them, the distance measured in zeros on bank statements and square footage of homes, and all the other metrics by which society sorts people into categories, collapsed into nothing. They were just two men, two fathers, two human beings connected by love and loss, and the enduring power of a woman who had lived her life as a gift to others. They stood like that for several minutes, the city lights blurring through the rain that had begun to fall against the windows, and the office was filled with the sound of grief and gratitude intertwined so tightly they could not be separated. Finally, when the worst of the storm had passed and Darius could breathe again, he looked up at Raymond Blackwell with eyes that were swollen and red, but held a clarity that had not been there before. "My wife didn't die from her illness at the hospital," he said, his voice raw and unsteady, but carrying a weight that demanded to be heard. "Not the way you might think. She didn't simply succumb to a disease that was stronger than medicine. The cancer was treatable. That is what the doctors said. They said it was treatable. They said that with proper treatment, full treatment, the right medications, and the right timeline and the right follow-up care, she had an excellent prognosis. They said she could beat it." He paused, and when he continued, each word was a stone dropped into still water. "But we couldn't afford the full treatment. The insurance wouldn't cover it all. Our plan had limits, caps, exclusions, all the fine print that doesn't mean anything until it means everything. We made choices. We cut corners. We delayed appointments to save money, spread out her treatments further apart than the doctors recommended, chose the less expensive medications when the better ones were available. We told ourselves we would catch up, that we would find a way, that it would all work out. And by the time we had scraped together enough money, by the time I had worked enough overtime and sold enough of our things and borrowed from everyone who would lend to us," he looked up at Raymond Blackwell, and the truth that came next changed everything. It was too late. The cancer had progressed beyond what the delayed treatment could address. The window had closed, and my wife, the woman who saved your daughter's life, died because we were too poor to save hers. She died because in this country, in this city, a good woman with a treatable illness can fall through the cracks of a system that values profit over people, that makes families choose between medication and groceries, between a doctor's visit and the electric bill. Raymond Blackwell had gone completely still. "And there's something else you need to know," Darius continued, and now his voice was steady, almost eerily calm, as if he had passed through the fire and come out the other side. "She was already sick when she donated. Did you know that? She had already been diagnosed when the registry called. The cancer was in its early stages, and she knew that the donation would weaken her, that it would take a toll on her body at a time when her body was already fighting. But she never said anything to the registry. She never disclosed it, because she knew that if they found out, they would disqualify her as a donor. They would remove her from the match, and your daughter would lose her chance." The revelation hit Raymond Blackwell like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his hand shooting out to grip the edge of his desk for support. His face contorted with an emotion too complex and too devastating to name, something beyond shock, beyond guilt, beyond the ordinary taxonomy of human feeling. He looked as if the floor had opened beneath him, and he was falling into an abyss from which there was no return. She knew she was ill, and still, he couldn't finish the sentence. His mouth moved, but no more words came. He pressed his palm flat against his chest, as if trying to hold his heart in place. "That was Nadine," Darius said, and despite everything, despite the tears and the rage and the unfathomable grief, a small, sad, proud smile crossed his face. "She would have given the coat off her back in a blizzard and told you she was too warm anyway. She would have given her last meal to a stranger and said she had already eaten. She would have walked through fire for someone else's child and called it a pleasant stroll. That was who she was. That was who I married. That was who Zuri lost." Raymond Blackwell lowered himself onto the edge of his desk, unable to make it back to his chair. His legs seemed to have lost their ability to support him. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a new purpose, a resolve forged in the crucible of this impossible revelation. The businessman, the deal-maker, the strategist, all of those personas had been stripped away, and what remained was simply a father who owed everything to a woman who had given everything. "Then we honor her," he said, and his voice, though shaking, had the quality of an oath being sworn. "Not just by helping Zuri, though we will do that completely and without reservation. but by making sure that what happened to Nadine never happens to another family. Not in this city, not anywhere we can reach. I'm going to establish a foundation, the Nadine Washington Foundation, dedicated to covering medical costs for families who fall through the cracks. Families just like yours, families where the treatment exists, but the money doesn't, where the science can save a life, but the system won't. He stood up and began pacing, his mind already working, already building the architecture of this vision. Real coverage, not the kind that comes with asterisks and exclusions and waiting periods designed to discourage people from using it. No bureaucracy, no mountains of paperwork, no families forced to sit in waiting rooms filling out forms while their loved ones deteriorate. No families forced to choose between treatment and keeping the lights on, between a child's medication and the rent, between hope and survival. You don't have to do this, Darius said quietly, though even as the words left his mouth he knew they were inadequate, knew that what was happening transcended the simple calculus of obligation. "Yes, I do," Raymond Blackwell replied, and there was no argument in his tone, only certainty. Lyric gets to live her life, to go to college, to become a doctor, to fall in love, to have children of her own someday, all because of your wife. All because a woman who was already fighting her own battle chose to fight someone else's battle first. The least I can do, the absolute minimum, is make sure her legacy saves countless others. And even then, even if we save 1,000 people, 10,000, it will never be enough. It will never equal what she gave. He stopped pacing and turned to face Darius. "But we will try, together, because you knew her best, and this foundation needs to carry her spirit, not just her name. It needs to operate the way she lived, with compassion first and paperwork second, with the understanding that every person who walks through the door is someone's Nadine, someone's Lyric, someone's Zuri." In the days and weeks that followed, Darius's life transformed in ways that felt both miraculous and earned. He moved with Zuri from their cramped apartment in Thornton Park to a comfortable home in the Willowbrook neighborhood, a house with a yard where Zuri could play, and a kitchen where Darius could cook the recipes Nadine had taught him. He started his new position at Blackwell Enterprises, arriving each morning in clothes that fit properly, sitting in meetings where his opinion was valued, contributing to programs that would reach the communities he knew intimately because he had lived in them. But first, before anything else, there was the surgery. 3 months after that night, in the corner office, Darius stood in the corridor of Hargrove Pediatric Hospital, no longer in a janitor's uniform, but in a button-down shirt and slacks, watching through the window of the recovery room as Zuri slept peacefully following her operation. The surgical team, led by the renowned Dr. Vanessa Coleman, had performed the procedure with the precision and care that came from being the very best at what they did, and the results had exceeded every projection. Zuri's heart, which had been struggling since birth to pump blood through a defective valve, had been repaired with a technique so advanced it was only available at a handful of hospitals in the world. The prognosis was extraordinary. His daughter would live. She would thrive. She would run and play and grow up and become whoever she wanted to be. She would grow up knowing her mother's story, knowing that she came from a lineage of extraordinary love. Darius pressed his hand against the glass, watching Zuri's chest rise and fall with steady, strong breaths, and he felt Nadine beside him so powerfully that he almost turned to look. Raymond Blackwell appeared at the end of the corridor, walking toward him with someone at his side. A young woman, tall and graceful, with intelligent eyes and a warmth about her that was immediately apparent. His daughter, Lyric Blackwell, alive and vibrant, a living testament to Nadine's sacrifice, her dark skin glowing with health, her natural hair pulled back in a way that reminded Darius achingly of how Nadine used to wear hers. She was wearing a university sweatshirt and carrying a small bouquet of flowers, and when she saw Darius, she stopped walking and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Mr. Washington," Lyric said softly, tears already forming in her eyes as she approached him. "I have wanted to meet you for so long. I have written letters I never sent and practiced speeches I never gave. I never got to thank your wife. I never got to stand in front of her and tell her what she did for me. But I thank her every single day. Every single morning when I wake up and the sun is coming through my window and I can feel my heart beating in my chest, I think of her. Every class I attend, Every page of my textbook I read, every dream I have about the doctor I want to become and the patients I want to help, it is all because of Nadine. My life is her gift, and I will spend every moment of it trying to be worthy of what she gave. Darius hugged this girl, this beautiful young woman his wife had saved, and felt Nadine's presence in the moment so strongly that it was almost unbearable. Her kindness was rippling outward like waves from stone dropped in still water, touching lives, creating connections, building a chain of compassion that would echo through generations and across the boundaries that society erected between people. That evening, after Zuri had woken up and smiled at her father and asked for ice cream, and after the doctors had confirmed that every indicator was positive and recovery would be smooth, Raymond Blackwell and Darius sat together in the hospital cafeteria, drinking coffee from paper cups while the world carried on around them. "I keep thinking about the randomness of it," Darius said. "How I happened to be assigned to clean your office. How you happened to be working late. How I happened to see the photograph. What if any one of those things had been different? What if I had been assigned to a different floor? What if you had gone home at 6 like a normal person?" Raymond Blackwell smiled and shook his head. "I don't think it was random at all. I think Nadine had something to do with it. I think she arranged the whole thing from wherever she is, made sure you would be in that office at that moment, made sure you would see her face and that the truth would come out. She wasn't the kind of woman who left things to chance, was she?" Darius laughed, a real laugh, the first one in longer than he could remember. No, she definitely was not. The Nadine Washington Foundation launched 6 months later in a ceremony held at the Crescent City Community Center in the heart of the neighborhoods where Nadine had lived and worked and volunteered. Raymond Blackwell spoke, and Darius spoke, and Lyric spoke, and there were tears and laughter and a sense of something powerful being set in motion. The foundation began accepting applications immediately, and within its first year, it had covered medical costs for over 300 families who would otherwise have been crushed by the weight of bills they could not pay and systems they could not navigate. Darius oversaw the community outreach arm of the foundation, visiting hospitals and clinics and churches and community centers, talking to families in crisis, sitting with them in waiting rooms, helping them fill out forms, holding their hands when the fear became too much. He brought to the work the same quiet dedication that Nadine had brought to everything she did, and people trusted him because he understood. He had been where they were. He had stood in the same impossible gap between need and resource, and he had nearly been swallowed by it. Lyric Blackwell continued her studies in medicine, driven by a purpose that went beyond academic ambition. She volunteered at free clinics on weekends. She mentored young students from underserved communities who dreamed of careers in healthcare, and she carried in her wallet a small copy of Nadine's photograph, the same one that still sat in its silver frame on her father's credenza. She told everyone who would listen about the woman who had saved her life, about the anonymous donor who had turned out to be anything but anonymous in the impact she had left on the world. Zuri grew stronger every day. The surgery had given her the heart she was always meant to have, strong and steady and full of the same capacity for love that had defined her mother. She started school the following fall, a bright-eyed girl with her mother's smile and her father's quiet determination. She made friends easily, the way children do, and she told her classmates about her mama, who was an angel now, but who used to be a real person who helped everyone she met. On the first anniversary of the surgery, Darius took Zuri to Rosewood Memorial Cemetery. They brought flowers, yellow ones, because yellow had been Nadine's favorite color, the color of sunshine and hope, and the sundress she had worn to Amber Beach. They sat on the grass beside her headstone, and Darius told Zuri the full story, all of it, everything he had learned that night in the corner office, everything about how her mama had saved a stranger's daughter while fighting her own battle, everything about how that act of selfless love had rippled outward and changed the world in ways that were still unfolding. Zuri listened with the solemn attention of a child who understands that something important is being shared, and when Darius finished, she placed her small hand on the headstone and said, "I'm going to be just like her, Daddy. I'm going to help everybody." And Darius, kneeling beside his daughter on the green grass under the wide blue sky, believed her with every fiber of his being, because he had seen what one person's kindness could do. He had seen it move through the world like light through a prism, breaking into 1,000 colors, touching 1,000 lives, illuminating the darkness in ways both grand and intimate. In the years that followed, the foundation grew beyond anything Darius or Raymond Blackwell had initially imagined. It expanded from Crescent City to other cities, from medical costs to comprehensive family support, from a single organization to a network of care that reached across state lines, and into communities that had been forgotten by every other institution. It attracted volunteers and donors and advocates, people who heard Nadine's story and saw in it a mirror of their own experiences, their own losses, their own convictions that the world could and should be better. Zuri grew up to become a nurse, dedicating her life to caring for others with the same warmth and selflessness that had been her mother's defining characteristics. She worked at Hargrove Pediatric Hospital, the very place where her own life had been saved, tending to children with the same conditions she had overcome, offering their parents the hope and reassurance that came from living proof that miracles were possible. She kept a photograph of her mother in her locker, and every shift she glanced at it and drew strength from the woman she was still becoming. Lyric Blackwell became Dr. Lyric Blackwell, a pediatric oncologist who specialized in treating children from families without means, who took cases that other doctors wouldn't touch because the patients couldn't pay, who built her practice on the principle that no child's survival should depend on their parents' bank account. She and Zuri became friends, and then something closer than friends, sisters in a way that transcended biology, bound by the gift that flowed through Lyric's bones and the sacrifice that had made it possible. In that photograph, the one of Nadine in her yellow sundress, laughing on Amber Beach with her hair caught by the wind and her eyes full of joy, the photograph that had started it all on that quiet night when a janitor walked into a billionaire's office and found his dead wife's face looking back at him. That photograph remained in Raymond Blackwell's office for the rest of his career. It sat on the credenza in its silver frame, and every person who visited that office and asked about it received the full story. It became the most talked about photograph in the business world, not because of its composition or its subject, but because of what it represented. It was a reminder, persistent and unyielding, that true wealth is not measured in dollars or assets or market share, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones the world never notices. The ones who mop floors and save lives in equal measure, who work double shifts and volunteer on weekends and sign up for donor registries on their lunch breaks. The ones who give everything and ask for nothing, who sacrifice in silence and love without condition, who prove every single day that being rich has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the size of your heart and the depth of your compassion. Nadine Washington had been invisible to most of the world. She had never appeared on magazine covers or given speeches at conferences or had buildings named after her during her lifetime. She had moved through her days quietly, a program coordinator at a community center, a wife, a mother, a neighbor, a friend. She had been one of the millions of people who keep the world running without recognition, who hold communities together with their bare hands, who make life bearable for everyone around them through small acts of kindness repeated. So often they become a kind of breathing. But her light burned so bright that it changed the course of lives she would never know about. It reached across the divide of wealth and class and circumstance and touched the heart of a dying girl, giving her a future that stretched out like an open road. It reached forward through time and touched her own daughter, giving Zuri not just a repaired heart, but a legacy of love to carry forward. It reached into the corner office of a billionaire and taught him something that all his money and power and influence had never been able to teach him, that the most valuable thing in the world cannot be bought or sold or traded, only given freely by those who understand that we belong to each other. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the city lights came on one by one, Darius would sit on the porch of the home that Nadine's goodness had made possible and watch Zuri play in the yard. He would think about the yellow sundress and the ocean wind and the sound of her laughter, and he would feel her presence all around him, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living force, a current of love that continued to flow through the world long after its source had returned to the earth. and he would whisper to the evening air the words he had never stopped saying, the words that had sustained him through the darkest night and carried him into the dawn. Thank you, Nadine, for everything, for all of it. And somewhere, in the space between the stars and the streetlights, he was certain she could hear him.